All right, Module 3 now, we focus on the all-important topic of retrieving data. So we'll focus first of all in this recording on data sources. We define data sources in the report definition itself to connect to our data. And there are three possibilities here. There's the ability to connect to a Power BI dataset, and there's also the ability to connect to external data stores. Interestingly, there's been a new feature added beyond what reporting services has had, and that is the ability to define static sets of data within the report itself. Now, your report can have one or possibly more data sources, and they're all defined with a unique name, the type, meaning the data provider, the connection string on how Power BI will connect to the store, and how authentication will take place. All right, let's take a look then at the first type of data source, and that is the Power BI dataset. This makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because when you publish the report to your workspace, there are already data resources that you have probably built in Power BI.
Yes.
So we see this as a first-class option, that the dataset itself, which could represent an import model, a direct query model to your data, or even a composite model. So while this course won't go into the details about a Power BI dataset, you have the ability to build reports off them.
Yes.
Okay, that dataset must reside within the same tenant. You as a report author must have build permission for that dataset. And if the dataset, now there is an exception, if it represents what we call a live connection to an external dataset, that could be hosted with SQL Server Analysis Services or Azure Analysis Services, you can't connect to it. You will have to connect directly to the model itself.
Yes, you need security to have to access it anyway. It's just the way that Power BI handles that exchange under the covers there. You just need to connect directly to it as opposed to going through Power BI.
And we'll come to those external. That's what we define as an external data source in just a moment. Chris, what can we say about the XMLA to connect to these data sets?
So if your data set's in Power BI Premium, you can use the XMLA endpoint to connect to it, which would mean you're choosing the specific Power BI, the analysis services provider, as the data source. Now, since the XMLA endpoint has been introduced, we've actually added a native connectivity option to Power BI datasets, which you can use for either datasets hosted in premium or non-premium workspaces. And in general, we advise people to go that route.
All right, so using the option we're describing here, create a data source off a Power BI dataset.
Yep.
And away we go. All right, the second type of data source then are the external data sources. So we can group them into two types. They're either hosted in the cloud or they're hosted on premises. So a look there at the cloud sources, all Azure, Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Data Warehouse, Azure SQL Managed Instance, and Azure Analysis Services. For on-premises, it can be SQL Server or SQL Server Analysis Services that could include tabular or multidimensional models if you have them, Oracle and Teradata. Do note then that Power BI as a cloud service, when it needs to retrieve data from these on-premises sources, will require that you have the on-premises data gateway set up and data sources configured to support that.
Yeah, and even though the slide says you can connect to SQL Server 2005 plus, it's probably not a good idea at this point to be running SQL Server 2005 for your data store.
What, in that it's out of support?
Yes.
Okay. Then we have the third type, Chris, the static sets of data.
Yeah, enter data is a very popular option in Power BI Desktop where you can just go and type a table of data. We did this about a year or so ago. We added the option to do enter data in the context of Report Builder. And I will say that this was a feature very much that the PM was looking for, because one of the challenging things with paginated reports is having a demoable a data report or a report that you can use, because you would always need a connection to a data source under the cover. So you had to have that set up in terms of SQL Server or some other data source. Power BI Desktop, of course, allows you to pull data into the data model, and it made it much easier to share files and show these demoable reports. So this is a great way to just type in some tables of data. In fact, I created a report with my friend Paginated Report Bearer where I used all of it as enter data, and it is great for a demonstration or proof of concept to get started quickly.
Great. Okay, so supplementary data, demonstrations, proof of concept.
Exactly.
So when Power BI connects, it will need to authenticate to your data stores, and there are two possible options, using Windows integrated security or specific credentials.
Yeah, so if you're using a cloud data source, you do have the option when you set this up to authenticate as the user viewing the report. So you can, if you're using Azure SQL Database or Azure Analysis Services, you can go ahead and set that up once you've loaded that up to the service. And the credentials could be, if you're storing the credentials, either Windows credentials or database credentials.
And then the authentication types. They differ according to the source that you're using.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to call out here is around the data sources for the gateway. You do now have a credential stored in the gateway. Interestingly enough, you can still apply row-level security, things like SQL Server, even with those stored credentials if you're using the user ID field that we talked about earlier, and we'll maybe touch on that a little bit later on.
All right, then just a note. We made mention that some global built-in fields behave differently in Report Builder compared to the report when it's actually rendered by the Power BI service. There are some things to note also about when working with data sources. You see, when you're developing the report in Power BI Desktop and you're toggling to preview to run the report, those connections are being made from your machine. However, once published, it'll be Power BI that will be doing those connections. So things will be a little bit different. You will require that when working with on-premises sources, you don't need the gateway at development time.
That's correct.
But when you publish it to the service, be prepared that that report isn't going to render because Power BI will have no physical ability to connect to the data. Okay, so we will cover this off in Module 7, that having published the report, there may be some additional tasks that you need to undertake to ensure that Power BI can achieve that connection and authentication.
And we do help you walk you through that once you've uploaded the report. We do prompt you to go and set those credentials at the time.
Right. I think we'll be seeing that shortly in a demonstration.
I think you're right.